Okay. Seems like it's working now. Let's keep our fingers crossed. Okay, so today we're going to focus in on animation. Um, I'm also sharing this on WebEx. If you want to open that up and follow along in class, you can. I understand not everybody is ready to animate. You should still pay attention to this because this is very process based, right? Animation seems like it's the willy-nilly fun part. It's not. There's a very specific way that you should go about animating that will make animation possible. Otherwise, you're really just wiggling stuff willy-nilly and hoping for the best, right? So today is the day we learn the process that you will do for the rest of your life. This is a very important lecture. And it's called pose-to-pose animation. You've heard that before, right? We had that in, remember that phrase? Huh?
Yeah, you studied during the 12 principles.
So during the 12 principles, we talked, that's one of the 12 principles written by Frank Thomas and Ollie Johnston, two of the greatest animators to ever live. I'm not making this stuff up. You should pay attention to it. Pose-to-pose animation is the way that the vast majority of animation is done, right? And the reason for that is because we're just this giant system of wiggly parts, right? And being able to sort of control all of that in a systematic way is difficult, right? It's like you're not going to keyframe the index finger wiggling as you're doing an entire walk cycle, right? There has to be a process that allows you to keep stuff organized. Right now we're only animating 3 controls, but on those 3 controls they have a minimum of 9 values that we're going to be animating. Some of them, have 10 or 11 or even 12, 13. You can add as many as you want to. A common character rig could have up to 200, well, they can have way more than that, but just a general character rig probably has around 200 controls on it. That's 200 different things for you to keep organized in your head at one time. This is the process of how you do it. So when we were talking about the 12 principles, we talked about pose-to-pose animation. Let me get up here and find that file for you again so we can look at that. So again, that's not my folder. Principles of animation, files, 12 principles. So here it is. Straight ahead and pose-to-pose, right? So let's look at that really, no. Look at that again. So here's a good example of 2 poses that would be in an animation, right? A pose in animation is a position that your character is in that is necessary to communicate an action, right? So in this animation, Hogarth bows it or raises his head, right? I think this is when they're doing, or when he's saying the prayer while the hand is trying to sneak out of the house or whatever, and he hears the crash and he raises his head up, right? So that's a simple motion. We have to explain Hogarth raised his head, right? For that, we need at least 2 poses, right? We need the head down, we need the head up. Right? And if we have those 2 poses, you can just look at these 2 images and you understand that motion, right? You understand that action. Hogarth raising his head. Right? This is very similar to a comic strip or something, right? All of that stuff in between is in-betweens, right? That's the motion that we transition in between those 2. So the way we're going to focus on creating animation is by finding the important poses in an action, and then we're going to work on that specific pose for the entire character, okay? So you're not just going to animate the feet kicking underneath it, and then animate the hips doing something, and then animate the head bobbling around, and then animate the toe wiggling, right? You're going to take the entire character and you're going to pose them as if they were a statue, right? And then you're going to set a keyframe on everything, right? All of the controls. And that means no matter what happens, on that keyframe, your character is always going to be in that pose, right? And then we're going to set the next pose. So we set our pose with Hogarth with his head down, right? Then we'll set that pose with Hogarth with his head up, right? And we're going to do that with everything. We're going to move every possible control, get it exactly where we need it, and then hit S and set a keyframe on the whole thing, right? And that means Maya is going to transition between those two poses, right? And it's going to do its best to give you the answer you need to, to show that animation of Hogarth raising his head, right? If we give Maya these two pieces of information, it will try to animate that transition in between, right? It's not going to do a great job, but it'll do an okay job. And then our next step of the process is to go in there and make that transition a little better, a little stronger, right? Okay, so this animation that we're working on is a walk cycle. I'll show you a couple other, just so you kind of get an idea. This is how animation is done. These are the poses to get the roar for Baloo in the Jungle Book, right? When he roars at Mowgli. So you see him, he's in this middle of this dance pose, and then he does this oh no no pose, and you need both of those hand gestures to clearly explain no no no, right? And then we see this approach toward this anticipation, and then roar, and then sort of the overlapping action of the roar. It's such a big gesture that he kind of has this follow through afterwards, right? So this pose-to-pose process is used in 2D animation, and I want you to think about this in terms of drawings, right? I know we're working in 3D space, but think of these poses as you doing a final drawing of the animation, right? These are the poses we're going to use. Okay, now I know this is on a cartoony character, but every locomotion cycle, whether it's a walk, a run, a skip, any of those, they all have some poses in common, right? Because those are all the same thing. Those are our feet pushing against the ground, driving our hips forward, and our body reacting to it, right? Those 4 poses, you're going to hear me say them like you'll wake up in the middle of the night, contact down, passing up. So you should just go ahead and, if you're looking to get a tattoo, contact down, passing up. You'll hear these phrases over and over and over again. If you leave any of these out, your walk will look incorrect, okay? Now, this isn't a great example. This is actually a really good example. This is an incredible walk cycle. But this isn't a great example for you to be able to pull information from to figure out what your own walk cycle should look like. The trick to this is to search Google Images for the word walk cycle. Very complicated. This is an image from Animator Survival Kit by Richard Williams. I'm sorry, I drew a blank there for a second. And you'll see those 4 poses again. Contact down, passing up, and then another contact. What is this contact?
The ending with the other foot.
It's the ending with the other foot, right?
Down,
So
pass up. Those are contact. Those are on one grip, and the first contact is the other.
right. So what?
The end of one, it goes to the other. With 2 feet.
So what you see is that cycle, right? This is half of a walk cycle. This is one leg's progression forward, right? So we start with the character's right foot contacting the ground. We end with the character's left foot contacting the ground, right? Now, if our animation looped there, we would get a pop where those 2 feet switch back, right? So what we really need is the other half of that walk cycle, which is the other contact down, passing, and up, right? But these are the 4 poses you're going to use. Actually, you can kind of see the full progression of it here, right? Contact down, passing up, contact down, passing up. And then you'll see that last pose is the same pose as the first pose, right? So this is without the arms. This may even be a little more beneficial for you to be able to see this one, right? But you'll see that if you just search the phrase walk cycle, this is a very common theme, right? If you get these 4 key poses, then your walk is going to make sense in terms of the physicality of it, in terms of physics and body mechanics, right? So most of this lecture today is me showing you how to create these poses, right? Now, I want to give a little bit of a disclaimer. Our character is going to walk forward, right? But I'm going to start that from our character in a neutral pose, right? So we have to get them to this contact pose first, right? And if we can go from sort of our neutral standing there pose to our contact pose, and we get all of these poses in, right? We just have to get a cycle, a single cycle, and then we can copy and paste those keyframes on down through there, and we can make our character walk forever, right? So we just have to get a cycle of this walk, and we can reuse that. Right? This is a very common daily activity for an animator, right? I've animated more walk and run cycles than anything else in the whole entire world, right? If you get a new character rig, you'll probably just start testing it by animating a walk cycle. You'll animate so many walk cycles that they'll become automatic, right? And so this is your first one. So let's go ahead and get started on it. I'm going to use this as reference, right? And we'll kind of talk about what's in each of these poses. So we'll start with the contact, right? Actually, no, let's go in here to my character control. So I have these 3 controls. It's a little bit of a pain in the butt to select everything, right? Like you go click, hold shift, select, hold, select that, right? So now I have all 3 controls selected, but that was sort of a pain in the butt to select that, right? I'm going to show you a trick to make a button that'll select all of that for you. So we're going to go to custom. That way I just have an empty menu here, right? And I'm going to open up down here in the very bottom corner, underneath your auto key and your play buttons and everything, there's a little bitty button right here, right? That's our script editor. So we've already talked about this, but every time I click on something, you'll see that it fires off a little script there, right? So the action of clicking on that is select-r hips underscore CTL semicolon, right? And if I were to type that down here under this mel line, right, you'll see that it actually does the same thing, right? So that code right there, that script piece, is one of the actions I just did, right? So this is nice. This script editor means I could type that whole thing out, or if I wanted to select something different, I could type that out. There's a whole bunch of different things I could do with this. But the reason I opened it up is because I'm going to steal some information in here in order to make a button, right? So I'm going to go to Edit, Clear All, so it's completely clear and I can see what it is I'm doing, right? So I'm going to deselect everything. So by deselecting everything, it's that Select-CL. I'm going to click this control, hold Shift, click this control, hold Shift, click this control. And so now that is the script to do those 4 actions, right? To clear my current selection and to select those 3 controls, right? So after I've done that, I can just reuse that set of scripts anytime I want to, right? I could just copy paste it and repaste it in there every time I need to select it. But what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to middle drag this up into my shelf and release it. This is a mel script, so it's asking what type of script this is. I tell it it's mel. And now I have a button there. And now every time I click that button, it's going to select all those controls for me, okay? This is the early stages of learning how to script. You don't have to do a ton of scripting, but it can be super powerful. You want me to do it again?
What?
Oh, I didn't know if you needed me to repeat it. What were you going to say?
Yeah, I was wondering how you got that black box with only that option. Like, how do we get it where it's no other option but that?
Oh, were you like, we cleared this out?
Yeah, not that, but this hot part where you drag the command into.
Custom, it doesn't have anything.
Oh, how to get it, are you saying like how to get this part empty?
No, it's custom.
Oh, this thing, custom. I just chose the custom tab. You probably have a custom tab up there. You can actually create new tabs. I think if you go File, New Shelf. So like if you have like a bunch of animation scripts you make, you can make a shelf of animation scripts. You can actually save that shelf full of animation scripts and take it to other computers. So yeah, but I'm just using, there's always a custom tab up there, and I'm just using that. So by doing that, if Maya closes correctly, if I hit X to close Maya later on here, then it should save that with your profile because it saves it in your documents. I can't promise it will, but Like on your home computer, it'll save it permanently. Usually, it seems to save it pretty well on these machines too. Occasionally, something happens with your profile and it gets wiped. But now what I have is a button that allows me to just select my entire control, like my entire character, right? And so no matter what pose I put this character in, if I click that button and then hit S, right, then I'm telling Maya that's the pose I always want all of these controls to be on when I'm on this keyframe, right? So I'm going to go ahead and start this off in sort of a neutral pose, right? To me, this is a little too neutral. Like this is too like perfect. Like the feet are perfectly straight, the head is perfectly straight, and I know it's a robot, but I just still like to mess it up a little bit. So I'm going to give her a little bit of an angle, sort of shift her weight over one leg. I'll probably go ahead and rotate this foot, maybe scoot this foot back a little bit. I just like to make this pose a little more interesting, right? Maybe even rotate her back a little bit. Okay. So I know that's not a huge deal, but I like doing that. I'm going to go ahead and select the entire character, and to make sure that this is always the pose that she's on when I hit, or when I get to frame 0, I'm going to set a keyframe on everything. I'm going to press S, and now all of my controls have a keyframe on frame 0. Right? I'm also going to turn on auto key like down here in the bottom. That's just because I like working with auto key. Okay. So I'm going to, now that I have my sort of my start pose, I'm going to try to go for my start pose and get her into this contact pose, right? So I'm not really going to worry about the way she transitions into it. I'm just going to try to recreate this pose as if it were a sculpture inside of Maya, right? So I'm going to recreate this contact pose. Now, there's a couple of key elements that are happening here. Our character is pushing off with their back feet, sort of rolling up on their toe, right? We call this the contact pose because this is the first instance at which the foot contacts the ground, right? And so depending on the type of walk your character is doing, a different part of the foot may contact the ground, right? If you're doing a sneak, you may contact the ground with your tiptoe. If you're doing a normal, like, walking to work walk, you're going to contact the ground with the heel of your foot, right? We go heel and roll forward to our toe, right? Our hips, let's kind of look at the location of them. If we see that kind of goes in this like arc. It's very similar arc to a bouncing ball. It's one of the reasons we start with that. And if we are looking at our arms, if your character happens to have arms, you'll notice that they're countering, right? So my character's right foot is forward, but his right arm is back, okay? So when we walk, we don't walk like this, right? We don't, that's really awkward. It really throws our body's weight on or off. So what we're doing is we're twisting to kind of keep ourselves in balance as we walk. So this is something you can carry out, like if your character has arms, whatever. But this is what I'm going to start working toward in my contact pose. So let's look at that. I'm going to move my character's foot forward. Right, I know I break the leg. That's okay. I'm going to go ahead and move the body forward too. Right. That's probably too big of a step. So I'm just going to wiggle her around until I get a good position. I'm really messing that up. There we go. I'm going to go ahead and rotate back on the heel. There we go. This is looking closer. And now this back foot, I want her to roll up on the toe. Now I have a keyframe that'll allow my toe to roll up, right? But I don't necessarily have a keyframe to roll the foot up. Some more advanced rigs will have that, but this is actually kind of hard to keyframe or to rig. So rather than get into that, I just kind of kept this rig simple. I just did all of that on pose 0. So let me undo all this. So I need to go out to like frame. I'm going to go ahead and go out to like frame 16. Let's redo this now. Object. There we go. So forward. Forward. Rotate back on the heel. Okay, so I usually set my character up to where the knee is almost completely straight, but not like locked. And the reason for that is because we'll get a weird pop in the knee if we completely lock it out. And so the last thing here, I'm going to go ahead and roll the toe up and sort of try to reposition this foot to where that makes sense, right? Now, how we can tell if this is working, you can grab here and start scrubbing, right, and see that that kind of works, right? But the other thing you can do, and this is a shortcut key I use a lot, the greater than, less than keys will allow you to step forward and back through animation, right? And this will allow us to just look at those two poses. As you can see, I think my character needs to come up a little higher. Probably need to point that in a little bit more. And I'm not sure that, I think my foot's sliding back just a little bit here. So I get that foot sliding back. I'm going to pull that forward just a little bit more. There we go. So I could probably do something about like that. So I'm going to call this my contact pose. I'm going to go ahead and select, well, one of the things I may also do just to make this a little more realistic, I'm going to twist her just a touch. That way that hip is kind of reaching forward. And then I'm going to select all of these controls by clicking that button and hit S. Okay. Now that means no matter what I do to any of these other keyframes out here, right, that's always going to be what she looks like on frame 16. Right? Unless I change that keyframe, that's what it's going to stick like, right? And that's what I'm wanting. All right. So let's look at this. If this is the whole cycle we're going to go through, right? Which would be the next pose that you would do? Anybody? The next contact? So would we do the middle contact or the end contact? Middle? So here's the interesting thing. We actually already have the end contact, right? It has to be the same exact pose as this, right? So getting that end contact is super easy. I just scroll out to sort of the end of my timeline and I hit S again. Right? So like if I look at this, I can go out here to the end of my timeline and that's still the same pose, right? So I need to figure out about how long this is going to take, right? I'm on frame 16, right? So my character is going to take 2 steps. We can time this out, but I really need this pose. I just need this pose further along, right? So I use a little bit of a trick here. So I'm going to go ahead and do the end pose just so I have sort of something to work with. I need 2 things. I need the location of that end pose and I need about the time that that end pose should happen, right? So it's really easy to figure out the time. You stand up and take 2 steps and sort of count it, right? So if you're doing 1, 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000, 4, 1,000, 5, 1,000. If you're doing that like kind of walking to work pace, you usually can take 2 steps, right, a whole cycle, in about a second. Right? How many frames is that in Maya? 24, right? So that means we should be somewhere around the 40 frame. Is that right? Am I doing my math right? I think so. So that's about where our keyframe needs to be. Now, the distance we need to cover is 2 strides, right? So you can kind of do a little bit of a cheat here too. And I can create a box, and I can scale that to be about the length of a stride, right? If I go look at this from the right view. So this is, I'm going to do it from the distance of the 2 heels, right? There we go. So that's about the distance of one of our character's strides, right? Which means that if I duplicate this, right, Control D, and go ahead and move this forward, right? So that's going to be the end of the first cycle, and I'll duplicate it again, and that's going to be the end of the second cycle, right? So that means that really what I need is for this heel to be at the end of that, I think. Let's see. Yeah. Let's see. Or is it that? Yeah, I think that's about what I need. Okay. So, again, select all of that and hit S. So now I have my 2 key, or I have 3 key poses, right? I have my neutral, I have my contact, and I have my end contact, right? So if I go halfway, now the reason I did that end contact is now I know the full length of my walk, right? That's the distance my walk is going to cover. So if I go halfway between those 2 key poses, right, frame 28, I at least now know the distance. I know like roughly the location. So Maya's giving me some stuff for free, right? So this is that next contact pose. The problem is that some of this is, most of this is backwards, right? Currently, her right foot is forward. I need her left foot to be forward on this pose, right? So I'm going to go ahead and set up my other contact pose here in the middle. So let's go ahead and sort of reverse these 2 feet. I'm going to offset this just a little bit so I can see it. So I'm going to try to get this pose sort of evenly divided here. Right. So this foot should be forward, rotating up. Heel. This foot should be backwards, doing something like this. So we're going for something like this, I guess. And a way we can kind of test this again is that greater than, less than key, right? So we got neutral, first step, second step, end, right? And is that looking okay? Not completely. I'm going to do a little bit of rotation on this. Right. That means I can probably get this a little higher. And I'm going to distribute her weight a little bit more in the middle. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and set a keyframe on that. Now, here's the mistake that a lot of people do is if you go ahead and set my playback speed to real time and hit play, you can hit play on this and see that like we have some motion there, right? And it's starting to look a little bit like a walk cycle or like a walk, but it's not really there yet, right? There's still a lot of stuff missing. So this is going to get our sort of our foundation for it. And now we're going to continue to subdivide these keyframes and put more and more detail in the middle, right? So remember when we said, Hogarth had those two keyframes, right? The head down, head up, right? And if you were to just let Maya take care of that, it's going to give you a very boring head raise, right? So our job as an animator is to go in there and put more keyframes or more detail in between all of this to make that motion make sense, right? So if we look at our passing pose, which is halfway in between our two contacts, right? This is one of the things that's missing. So halfway between our two contacts is the passing pose. This is the point where everything is sort of in the middle of that transition, right? We're switching back and forth between the 2 feet. In this point here, we're on one foot. The other foot is in the air passing forward, right? If you were to look at this pose from the front, the character would be shifting their weight over that leg that is supporting them. And so we're going to make that pose, okay? And the interesting thing is, if we go halfway between these two, we're already kind of there, right? This is what Maya is giving us for that passing pose, right? So let's clean this up a little bit. I'm going to zero out the rotation X on this. I'm going to zero out the Y. Sorry, it didn't work, did it? Zero out the toe. And now our foot should be pretty much on the ground. All right, so now we get that. All right, so you see that kind of go flat on the ground. Now, if we go back to that passing pose, you'll see that the other foot is sort of up in the air, traveling forward, sort of knee first and dragging the toe behind. All right. So that's what I'll do with this foot. Raise it up in the air. Sort of drag it back this way. Now, the passing pose, the hips are a little higher than they are on the contact pose. If you notice the location of this little sphere for the hips, right? It's a little higher. So I'm going to go ahead and put it a little bit higher. And the other thing that is interesting is if we look at this character from the front, we need to shift her weight over that foot a little bit or she would fall over. Right? If we're right in the middle, that's unbalanced. So we got to get her over just a little bit, sort of rotate that. And we're going to get this passing pose a little more interesting. May even get a little bit of drag on that toe. So, select everything, set a keyframe, and now if we watch this animation, that first half is going to look a little better than the second half. Just a little bit, a lot. So I need a passing pose on this other side too. So I want to go again halfway between, and we're just going to do the other version of that, right? In this version, this foot is on the ground, right? And this foot is the one that's raising up in the air. So let's go ahead and figure that out. So we'll go to 0 on our rotate Z, 0 on our Y, and that's going to get it back on the ground. 0 out that toe. So now that toe or that foot should be pretty close to the right location. Let's see how that looks. It's not bad. May have to tweak it a little bit. I'm going to raise the character's hips up just a little bit. Not the highest point, but somewhat. And then on the passing leg, something like this. Again, select everything and hit S. So let's look at the poses we have so far. We have contact, passing, contact, passing, contact. Right? And we should look at this from all these different sides, and we should start to see that the walk is sort of starting to come together, right? If we hit play on this, it's going to look a little bit better, especially that middle part. It's a little slow to get started, right? But that's looking a little bit more like a walk, right? A lot of people have a tendency to give up here. Or not give up, but to be like, that's good enough, right? Those people are not going to be animators. So we have to keep sort of pushing this and figuring out the rest of what's going on here, right? So the next pose I'm going to look at is the down pose. So that's this pose here. Why does the down pose exist?
Because of gravity.
Because of gravity, right? So if we look at the passing pose, the one we just made, right? I like to think of this like a walk cycle has several different ways that people have described it that I think are very appropriate, right? Some people call a walk a perpetual fall forward, right? So if you realize what's happening, for us to move, right? We have to throw ourselves out of balance, right, and start to fall, and then we have to catch ourselves, right? And if we catch ourselves and just stop, oh, then we stopped, right? If we push back with this back foot and push ourselves forward, then we kind of launch ourselves over our supporting leg, right? And we start to fall forward again, and we got to catch ourselves again, right? So a walk cycle is this perpetual fall forward where you continue to catch yourself, right? I like to think of this, some of this as well, as sort of a pole vault over your leg, right? And so if you look at this, on our contact pose, our character is pushing off with their back leg, right? But this leg, the front leg hasn't quite made contact yet. It hasn't quite gotten, rooted into place, right? On the down pose, that's where that sinks into the ground and you've pushed off with this back leg. And on the passing pose is where you're kind of vaulting yourself over that leg, right? Now, the rest of this progress is you falling forward and preparing to catch yourself with the other leg again, right? So it's sort of this perpetual pole vault over your front supporting leg, right? So this down is where you're catching yourself from this fall forward, right? So you're catching yourself falling forward, and you sink into that because gravity's pulling you, right? Your hips sort of sink into that, right? So that's what we're going to do with the down pose. Now here's a little bit of a disclaimer, a little warning here. I'm going to create the down pose for both steps, and it's going to look wrong, right? You're going to click that, then we'll hit play on the animation, and then suddenly it just won't look right anymore, right? That's why it's best to just think of these poses, right? If I'm trying to get the poses exactly right, then after I get them all in there, the walk cycle will look right. So after I put the down pose in, it's going to look wrong. After I put the final pose in there, everything will come together. Okay, you have to trust the process, right? So right now, here are my key poses. Go backwards through them. So contact, passing, contact, passing, contact. Right? So I'm going to go halfway between the contact and the passing and put my down pose. Okay, so the down pose, the foot should be in the same location as it is on the passing pose. So we'll go about halfway in between here. I guess it's right here, right? And I'm going to go ahead and just set a keyframe on everything. Okay. But why manually put some of these keys in if I can just steal it from something else, right? So I need this pose of this front foot needs to be the same on pose 19. So I'm just going to middle click on 22 and drag that back to 19 and hit S, right? And so now what we get is that foot flattening out. Oh man, needs to be closer to the ground. Messing up my contact pose. I'll tweak that here in a minute. Anyway, that'll work. Right, so that foot has gone flat, and now I need my hips to kind of sink into that, right? So if you notice the hips in that previous image, that's where the hips kind of sink into that step, right? Now the back foot at this point should be pushing off, right? That back foot is sort of like launching your character forward at this point. So I'm going to do a little bit more work with this. I'm going to also push my hips forward a little bit more. And then with this back foot, I'm going to have it kind of kicking backwards as it comes off. So toe like that, right? Maybe that's a little high. I may go ahead and keep it back like that a little bit more. Right. So that's the down. Now let's look at my weight again. Yeah, in fact, that's okay. Something I'll sometimes do is on the down pose, I'll kind of lean my character forward a little bit. That way they kind of sink into it. So, contact, down, passing, contact. So we got to get another down right here in between, right? So again, select everything. I'm going to hit S, and then I'm going to steal that key pose from 34. Again, if you don't remember how to do this, all I'm really doing is if I drag on my timeline, it will update. But if I middle click drag, it doesn't, right? So I can middle click from frame 34 and drag it back to 31, and my foot is still in the location it was on 34. So if I just hit S now, I've stolen that key pose from 34 on that foot, right? Now, again, the foot goes flat. Right, but I need the hips to kind of sink into that. So I'm going to lower that down, move it forward. There we go. I think I could even sink it a little bit more. And then this back foot is pushing off. Right, so let's do it like that. Maybe like that. There we go. So now if I look at these poses, contact, down, passing, that looks pretty good, right? And then contact, down, passing, and then there's the other contact. But if I hit play on this, this is actually going to look really bad. It's going to look like there's a pop in the middle of it. So, well, it's not as bad as it sometimes looks. So really the last thing that's missing on this is getting the up pose. So let's look at the up pose. The up pose is the point where you've sort of pushed yourself over that front foot and you're falling forward, right? Now, on the passing pose, your foot's still behind you, right? And so what you're trying to do in this up pose is you're trying to give yourself enough time to flip that other foot forward and catch yourself, right? So it's the highest point that your hips ever reach in a walk cycle, right? It's also the point where, like a lot of people will kind of push off the toe a little bit, so it's raised up on the toe. Sometimes you can do that, you don't always have to. It helps because you're sort of transitioning into the next contact pose here where the foot is rolled up on the toe. So you can sort of start transitioning into it. I usually don't have it quite that much. This is a really exaggerated illustration of it. But you'll see that the other foot is sort of trying to flip its way out there to catch yourself, right? And so that foot is going to be, sort of coming forward as fast as it can. Sometimes you can drag the toe a little bit to help with that. So let's go ahead and open up this again. So this is our up pose, right? Frame 25. And so you'll see that most of it is there, right? It's pretty close. So I'm going to go ahead and select everything, hit S. I'm going to take my character a little higher. And then I'm going to drag this. I'm just going to kind of exaggerate this foot a little more. Something like this. I sometimes will drag the toe behind a little bit. Select everything, hit S. So let's see how that looks. Contact, down, passing, up, contact. A little bit of a slip there on that back foot. We can work on that in a minute. Contact, down, passing. And so our last pose, up. We're going to hit S. I'll go ahead and keep that foot there for the most part. I'm going to raise the hips significantly. And then drag this foot just a little bit more. Select everything and hit S. Right. So again, contact down, passing up, contact down, passing up. And so I'm going to go ahead and make sure I got keyframes on everything. S, S. And so if we watch this now, hopefully it'll look okay. Let me see. I'm going to sort of minimize the screens, not minimize it, like zoom in here so we can see this walk cycle. So we're looking pretty good, right? This is where I'm going to save it, because this next thing I'm going to do, I mean, we just have one cycle right now, right? The assignment is for 6 steps, and we have 2. So I'm going to show you a trick to where we can finish this up in probably less than 5 minutes, right? So I'm going to go ahead and save this first, just so I have a file to come back to if something crashes. Increment and save, right? So if I extend my timeline out here, let's go ahead and set this to 0. I'm going to extend this out here further, right? So it's just this range right here that I need to duplicate. I don't need to duplicate that first pose. I just need to duplicate 16 through 40. Right? So if I were to highlight all of this and right-click and say copy, I can go out here anywhere in my timeline and right-click and say paste. And under paste, there's 2 options. There's paste and paste connect. Okay. Now, I will give you a heads up. Do not do Control-C, Control-V. What that will do is copy and paste your character's rig, and you'll have 2 versions of your character, and it'll break a bunch of stuff. So this is right-clicking on the timeline and copying keyframes, and then we can paste keyframes. But there's 2 different options for paste, right? So let's kind of look at what that means, right? If I do paste, it's going to take those keyframes exactly as I sat them, right? And it's going to paste another copy of them right here on frame 60. So if I hit paste, it just pasted my entire animation over here again, right? And so you'll see what I get is my character walks forward, slides back, walks forward again. Right? So that's something. I could always just go in the graph editor and slide that forward. That would work too, right? But I'm going to undo that. So paste connect, what it does is it takes that last keyframe, the keyframe you're on, right? And it pastes the rest of that animation relative to that last keyframe. Now that may not make sense to you, but if you realize what we did is we moved our character forward over time, starting from here, right? We move that character forward to here. Well, if we do paste connect, what it's going to do is it's going to imagine that this is the same keyframe as this, and it's going to move it forward over time from here, right? So for this to work, though, my ending keyframe, 40, has to be the same pose as 16, except it's just scooted forward. Right? So that's one of the reasons that we did this the way we did. So this is a little tricky. May have to rework some stuff at times, but this should work now that if I highlight everything here, right click, copy, paste, paste connect, continues to walk forward. Right click, paste, paste connect, continues to walk forward, right? So really that means all I have to do now is end that walk cycle. I just have to get my character to stop, right? So I can just set another keyframe there at the end, right, where my character comes to a stop. So the character is coming forward here, maybe by frame. I'll tell you what, I'm going to select the entire character. I feel like my start is a little slow anyway. I'm going to scoot this back a little bit. So I'm going to have it come to a stop by frame. Let's do by frame 100, right? So by frame 100, I'm going to go ahead and sort of zero out the X, the Y, move this forward, move that forward just a little bit too. Let's see. And then I'm going to go ahead and get this. 0, 0. There we go. Okay. Select all of it. Okay, so now what we have is, so that stop is a little slow. Probably what I would do is sort of continue to animate a little bit here. I'll probably go ahead and get one more keyframe there. But still the key pose from this onto there. Get my hips forward. This gives my foot the ability to kind of come forward. Select everything there. And then for this pose, I pretty much want it to be completely the same as this pose. So I'll just middle click and drag it to here. Except I may go ahead and like overshoot a little bit or something, right? Like I may have my character kind of go a little bit past that, right? And that way she can kind of settle back, right? Okay, so this is what we have now. It's not perfect. This is a pretty good start. Right? What I do now, and this is what I'm going to encourage you to do, because this is what we call like the phases of this is blocking plus, which is adding a little bit more keyframes, and then splining. And splining is when we go into the graph editor and start editing the curves, right? And there's not really a process to that. Really what you're doing there, I mean, there is a process to that in the order in which you spline them, right? But really what we're doing there is we're just looking for things in the motion that look wrong, and then we're going into the graph editor and trying to use that as a tool to fix them, right? So one of the things I'm kind of seeing that is a little wrong in this, for me, is I feel like the character is sort of hesitating as she moves forward. Feels like she has like a little bit of a pause right in there. So if I go in here to my animation view of this, I can look at my character's hips, right? It's this control here, hit W, right? And that's probably her translate Z is the forward motion. And if I look at my translate Z curve, you'll see that there's some spots in there where it kind of flattens out. Right? And so some of that may be there. Right? Some of it may be that I need to like do a little bit more like this to kind of make that motion continue forward in a progressive way. Just cleaning up these curves a little bit. I don't know why that one's flat. So just by doing that little tweak, I may be getting rid of that hitch in the forward motion, right? Something else I'm noticing is just that little head bobble on the step. Like I like that, but it's a little too sharp. So I could go look at that. That would be my rotate X, right? Because that's the direction that that's happening, is rotate X. So I go to my rotate X axis here. And what you'll see is there's a little bobble forward, but there's not really a bobble backwards, right? It's like it's flat, pop, flat, pop, flat, pop. And so what I can do is I can kind of favor that a little bit, right? And make that pop a little less noticeable. Now, so that's a very subtle change. You may not even be able to see it. These changes in the graph editor build up over time, and we will start to be able to see the difference in stuff. Right? I know the graph editor isn't fun. I know that it's kind of like something you dread. If you're going to be an animator, you have to get over that. Like, I'm not sure you are. You may not even be interested in being an animator. You may just be taking this class so you can get to the game design class or the visualization class. Fair enough. Like, nothing wrong with that, actually. But if you're going to be an animator, you can't do that professionally without the graph editor. So I would encourage you to take some time to go in there and be using that, like, starting now, right? Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and save this file because this is pretty much where I need it to be. I'm going to go ahead and delete these things. Right? I could do more polish on this, but if you get it to this point, I'll be very happy. Right? And if you watch the other video I have, there's some good stuff in there too about how to polish this up a little bit more. Okay, so I have that. I'm going to go ahead and hit stop on the video. I'll upload this video here in probably just an hour or so. Hopefully this time it'll